The keys were right, and Alan Lichtman was not biased about them. So, this video will discuss electoral economic theory and how in 2024 the keys were right, firstly, and that Alan Lichtman was not biased about his keys, secondly. So this will disagree with both Alan Lichtman, who is a bit pessimistic about his keys, and it will disagree with a lot of right-wing pundits, which have argued that Alan Lichtman was biased about his keys, and then make changes which aren't based in electoral economic theory or practice as well. This video does not deny the election results. I want to say this 100%. Obviously, Donald Trump won the election. He won it by around 250,000 votes, which is a very large amount. Largest margin for a Republican since George H.W. Bush back when he was popular in 1988. And yeah, so ever since the Bushes and whatnot have been unpopularized, Donald Trump has been popularized somewhat, but not until recently, not until literally November the 5th this month. But what the point of this essay, this presentation, is basically that to try to argue my points, which is that Lichtman did not have or use his bias in his article, but instead was only his only issue was that his rules were too broad, and so thus he could argue somewhat either way on a lot of these issues. And some of the ones, such as GDP per capita, is not actually strong economic theory when discussing elections, specifically because of economic distribution as well. And what it also does is it turns on a historical basis to also fix the 2000 election as well, to also, sort of work towards the 2000 election, which Bush ended up winning. Even though if Alan Lichtman does argue against that, there's also economic metrics against that. Now, talking about the keys, the system is that 13 conditions, which is basically like positions that happen, things that happen in an election. Those are conditions, really. Keys, which he calls keys, because he wants to add. He's a very strong thematic preference because he has that position, he has that sort of physical attribute. Keys are, of course, real things, and so real keys are about having real keys to a White House sounds like a situation that could actually happen, rather than just sort of calling it 13 conditions or 13 general conditions that happen, which is somewhat abstract. And so it's very strong metaphor, is what I'd argue. That is, if 6 or more keys of these are false, then the opposition candidate will win. So that means if 6 conditions or keys don't happen towards the incumbent and instead will go to the opposition, they'll end up not doing so well. In 2024, Lichtman argues that Trump would have gotten 4 in this situation, which means that Kamala Harris, the Democrat in California, would win against Donald Trump, the Republican from Florida, but with 9 keys, which was, of course, not legitimate. And this is the list of keys that happened. There is, of course, no contention over the primary contest, or there's limited contention over the primary contest, and there's limited contention over social unrest. There is a few, there's a few different, pundits will say literally everything, but the third party major policy change scandal, charismatic challenger, are more into that position. But I would actually argue that strong long-term economy and major foreign policy success are the two actual keys that were somewhat missed from this prediction, from his prediction, because they lacked political scientific basis, and not just political scientific basis, but also electoral basis as well. The vengeance, of course, this was wrong. The vengeance is happening because the prediction was wrong. So the vengeance, is generally, I would consider that to be just general sort of right-wing pundits, but also the people like Cenk Uygur or Nate Silver sort of rejoicing over the fact that they were right about a candidate that they didn't like winning. And so thus they ended up not really doing much. So thus, a lot of those a lot of those left-wing candidates were also somewhat venging against the calls of Alan Lichtman. A lot of people argue either that Lichtman was biased. Of course, this was done by Cenk Uygur, for example. He said that Lichtman had a bias towards Democrats and that Trump was clearly going to win, which is something that's clearly politically motivated. Obviously, Cenk sort of tried to take a Nikki Haley route because he was running for the Democratic presidential primary in 2020, and of course he got very few delegates, and he ended up and so thus he said that he was the only electable candidate. That was one of his pushes. He said that Joe Biden was old and weak and that he was going to be the electable candidate, which I doubt. I have a heavy doubt on that. But more importantly, a lot of people like Samuel Gordon, which will be watching this video. Hi, Samuel. Has said that he is biased on that position, which I would argue slightly isn't true. Firstly, historically, he hasn't got those elections right, but secondly, a lot of times that people try to fix the keys, they end up getting those predictions wrong. So, for example, Precision Politics, which used to be Let's Talk Politics and now changed his name to Precision Politics, did try to fix the keys, and he ended up getting 1972, which was a landslide, wrong, and he got 1992, which was another landslide, wrong. If he was managing the keys in 1972, he would be God. There would be no coming back for Precision Politics in 1972. This is mainly because he argued that short-term keys should be focused on how the perception of the economy is. And of course, the short-term key in 1972 would have been very horrible, even though the short-term economy itself was actually doing quite well. This is because 1971 was an oil issue, and 1972 was relatively fine. So thus there's a bit of hangover of those bad feelings about the economy. And this is actually even repeated by people who were alive back then. They sort of felt like everything was all doomed in 1972. And this is, I think, the opposite. This is the opposite way in 1992. Everyone sort of felt happy about 1992, even though there was a recession, because they felt like George Bush was able to contain it. But also they felt that historically, a lot of those people felt that a lot of that Reaganomics was working, and thus it doesn't really matter what happens in a recession, really. And then, as well as that, Samuel Gordon gets it wrong in 2012 and 1948. He gets it wrong because he names a lot of keys. and then he sort of like shotguns everything in hopes that he gets the right key. And so when he missed 2012, I'm trying to get my. He missed. Oh yeah, non-charismatic challenger. He would have given Obama charisma. No, he wouldn't have. It would have been. Yeah, third party. No, it would have been major policy change. He wouldn't have named Obama's policy as major, and thus he would have given, among a lot of other things, he would have given the 2012 election to be wrong. I mean, I could make a whole video just in general, just sort of going through a few, like even one of these sort of like pundits, and just sort of look at elections where they would have been wrong. I won't spend a whole bunch of time on that. In 1948, this was also a similar issue. It was the short-term as well as that the short-term economy as well is also being, when you think it's just about popularity of the short-term economy, then that generally this actually dissuades from people who actually care about their economic positions, which is not good when you're actually thinking about people who the voting base that the economic key is trying to appeal to, which is the people that actually that are looking at their finances and then going to the ballot box, rather than just people thinking about the economy in general, like, ooh, the economy's going well, or oh no, the economy's going horribly. They're just sort of not doing so well. The economy itself, now it's time to actually get into what I think about the economy. So, firstly, to diss Alan Lichtman, GDP does not account for wealth distribution to a point of voter value. So, if a candidate gives the top 10% $1 million and no one else nothing, so no one gets nothing except for the top 10%, then obviously the top 10% is going to go for more the first candidate, but the 90% is likely to go to the second candidate, assuming that they're voting rationally. However, Lichtman would argue that if the other terms were everyone gets, say, like $99,000, then that's actually good for the first candidate, and the first candidate is actually the second candidate, or the candidate that's very badly distributionary is going to win that election. Thus, medium income is the best, as if people who are better off are more likely to vote for the incumbent. And specifically medium family income, this works towards swing states. Swing states are more family-based. They've sort of got more of a family orient. And that works. It's the only one that actually kicks a false in 2000. Every other prediction is close, like the individual, real median individual income gets close. And so if Alan Lichtman still believes that the 2000 election was rigged, then he can put that, he can use the individual income growth, but the family income also targets the 2000 election as well as the 2024 election. These sort of statistics are kind of slow because they're not really on topic in the economy, even though I would argue that they should be, because they're a bit more sentimentary when it comes to this. But yeah, obviously we're at a point now where it's basically impossible for the Democratic Party to win this key, because it requires a crazy singular year amount, which is 6,420 in a year, which is more than most of these presidential candidates get in like a turn, except for like Obama's second and Lyndon B. Johnson's term was pretty blatantly in there for true, but yeah, no, there's no real spot for that. As well as that, okay, the dictators. The second key that I'm going to deal with geopolitical theory now is that American geopolitics is adversarial and it is very active. So if a politician wants to win the military or whatnot vote, the geopolitical vote, then they have to deal with adversarial identities. And so they have to create an adversarial identity. What does an adversarial identity really mean? It means that they are able to make beneficial deals with opponents, and they are able to fight opponents with guns as well. Of course, this is because of geography. Of course, America is surrounded by sea, so they don't really care about any other country except for themselves, unless their country has military whatnots in other countries. Of course, as well as that, the War of Independence for the United States was very simple. It was really just the Americans and the English who were fighting that war, so it is very easy to see an American fight in this position. And also heavily religious society, so most of these, most general geopolitical things are considered if you have a stalemate, for example, then the religious society will turn against you because killing is a sin and thus you shouldn't be killing people. But if you start winning wars, they start promoting patriotism, and patriotism turns the religious society in support of you. And so thus you'll get the patriot vote and you get the religious vote as well, which is 70% of the population in the United States is religious. As well as that, so there is a few elections where you sort of, where there was other misses as well, but they didn't turn into actual election misses. Those would be 1916 and 1980. Of course, 1916 was way closer than the Keys would have predicted it to be, and 1980 was way more of a landslide for Reagan than the Keys predicted it to be. So this sort of ideal works quite well. This is a similar sort of recurring thing that happens over here, which is that not just the 2000s changed false, but also 1984, where Reagan won all states except for one, turned true. And then 1980, where Carter lost in a landslide, this became false. And so thus, this sort of turns the Keys closer to more to a stronger position, to a more predicting position where you can predict how much the margins based on the votes. Of course, as well as this, just one extra key could also predict the election from October 2023. So that would have Cenk Uygur fuming, it would have Nate Silver fuming, and it would have so many other people just gone. How? Premising RFK's independent run as a third party ticks the third party box because him and Jill Stein have a heavy trend towards third parties. Of course, Alan Lichtman might be watching this and will say, well, two parties filling the 5% threshold doesn't actually fulfill that threshold. Well, it did in 1948, so it is kind of inconsistent if you're saying, well, there's a third party in 1948, and there's, there's third parties in other elections too, but there isn't a third party, there isn't two third parties when it's nowadays. It's sort of that you should be a bit more consistent would be what I'd say. And being consistent would have trolled Nate Silver so much. You would have had you had an opportunity to smash everyone. All those Democratic Coopers would have been spineless. you would have got them down. You would have broken this. You would have broken the rest of their spine. They don't have a spine at all. You would have gave them a spine again. That's what you would have done if you predicted it October 2023. And I would have been fuming too, because I was still predicting a Biden win in October 2023. So yeah, wow. So this is my change in the in how I predicted it was July 2024 as well. So thus, yeah, I would have been 7 months late in comparison to the keys in this situation. But October 2023, that would be crazy though. Like, that's the thing with the situation. It's a major win if you can get there by October, if you can get a prediction by then. Whereas, like, not even Gold Crown Politics back in 2023, he would have been in his cave. All those other dudes, they would have been, like, barely talking about the primaries at that point. You just pulling up a Trump victory then would have trolled everyone, little bro. Like, so thus, I would argue, slight changes, these are very slight changes. They don't lose any other elections, all those three. And they're able to predict elections earlier and more accurately. So I would actually argue that they are capable of they're capable of being implemented into the actual rules of the key system. Again, yeah, thanks for watching. This map in the background is what the electoral map actually looked like in the way that I actually classify this. I'll have it down in the description as well. But yeah, I spent a lot of time rambling. I spent a lot of time with my Coca-Cola can touched, randomly non-existent, I guess. So yeah, best of luck out there in the next election, all of you future predictors, all of you current predictors too. Hopefully you predict all 50 states in the next election in 2028 and in 2032. See ya!